Accumulators are used to display the year-to-date totals on payslips and other reports. In this video, we will look at the Rebuilding the Accumulators function. Accumulators refer to the year-to-date values recorded on the employee record located under Payroll, on the Accumulator tab. For example, taxable allowances. You may need to rebuild accumulators during the year. If you have opened and processed a manual pay for a previous financial year, when you suspect an error in your accumulators, or when an application or user error occurs during pay processing, and the accumulators are not updated correctly on close. The Rebuild Accumulators function will clear the year-to-date fields and rebuild them based on what has been processed with the same year-to-date code as entered in the settings. The Rebuild Accumulators command rebuilds the accumulators from history for the current year-to-date period. It's important to note that the Rebuild Accumulators overrides any manual changes such as synchronization into accumulators, including user-defined accumulators like Gross Last Pay. This command updates accumulators using only data that was entered through a pay sequence. If you have accumulating user-defined fields, or UDFS, these will be rebuilt based on what has been processed by Payroll. You can stop these from being rebuilt during the Rebuild Accumulators function by changing the setup of the user-defined field. Go to Administration and click User-Defined Fields. Click to open a user-defined field that's set to accumulate and click the Accumulation tab. You can see that the Include and Rebuild field is set to Yes. If you change this to No, it will not be rebuilt based on the transactions that have gone through Payroll. You would use the Rebuild Accumulator command when you've identified incorrect accumulator data. For example, when there's an issue with an employee's record, like David here. For this example, right-click on Employee, David, and select View History Analysis. Drag the sort column up here. We can see that his total taxable allowances equal $18,620. Whereas if we double-click into his employee record, click Payroll, and on the Accumulator tab, we can see his taxable allowances total $74,480. This indicates an issue with his record as the two amounts don't match. Let's do the same for Judy Hay. Her total taxable allowance is $15,037.05. And yet, when we go to her employee records, Payroll Accumulator tab, her taxable allowances show $20,357.05. If you have an individual employee with incorrect year-to-date amounts, like David or Judy, you can rebuild the accumulators individually for each employee. However, if you need to rebuild the accumulators because you have closed the pay from a previous financial year and all the employees' year-to-dates are incorrect, then you will need to run it for the period code for all employees. You will need to run a query to pick up all employees that should be rebuilt. If you're unsure of who needs to be included in the rebuild, we suggest applying a query when you run the rebuild accumulators that includes all employees in that period. Before you run the rebuild accumulators, you need to get the accumulated codes to include in the rebuild. The best way to get these codes is to look at the pay status details. From the left-hand menu, expand the Payroll menu and select Rebuild Accumulators. Then, click the Pay Status button in the top menu and click the PR Sequences tab. Find the last standard pay that closed. In this example, it's the top line, and make note of all the period to date, tax to date, all the accumulated codes attached to this period, as you'll need this for running the rebuild accumulators. Now that you have the accumulator codes, let's look at how to rebuild the accumulators. It is highly recommended to take a backup of the database before running this process. Go to Payroll and double-click Rebuild Accumulators. The filter screen appears. To run the rebuild accumulators for a single employee, click the Query field and select Default, and in the Employee field, select the desired employee. To run this for a group of employees, clear the employee code and leave it empty. Then select a query from the list. In this example, EMP-ENT, and click OK. On the Payroll Accumulator Period screen, enter or update the accumulator codes as required based on the details noted from the Payroll Status tab. For this example, we have all of the accumulator codes entered. Click OK to continue. PayGlobal will rebuild the accumulators. When this is completed, click Yes to view the log file. We can see that the process is completed and has successfully updated employee accumulators. Close the log file by clicking the X. There are a few items that should be checked post-rebuild. Start by checking the Employees Accumulator tab to ensure that year-to-date amounts have been corrected, based on what the employees have been paid in the current financial year. To do this, go to Employees and right-click on the employee who needs checking. In this case, let's check David. Select View History Analysis. The filter is set to this year to date. Drag the sort column up here and take note of the employee's taxable allowances. In this example, this is $18,620. Now open to the employee record. Click Payroll and the Accumulator tab. Here we can see the taxable allowances now reads $18,620, matching the other amount. You can check all employees this way if needed.